be there. When you opened up your computer today, and if you opened up Maya, you may have seen the shelf that had your name on it because we saved it, and it may have just been there by default. But every time you come in, it may not be there. So we want to make sure that we copy our preferences. Oops. So on your P drive, right, you have a P drive, there's a 2016 folder. So if you don't see that, if you've opened up Maya and you don't see your name there, close Maya down. On your P drive, you want to look for that 2016 folder. I'm going to go where I put mine. Oops. Okay, so you see how I have a 2016 folder here. You just want to delete that 2016 folder. Okay, that deletes the old preferences. From the time you were here on Wednesday, they had a Dynamics class and we had an animation class. Both of those classes used Maya, set up their own preferences, did whatever. We want to put our preferences back in there. So leave that window open, just toss it off to the side. And then open up another window. So you can go back to the start menu and go back to computer and go back to your P drive. You have your own folder. That's your last name, F2015, correct? You have a 2510 folder, and inside your 2510 folder is where you should have your 2016 stuff. If you didn't have it from last time, it's not a big deal. We're going to go over this process again, okay? You want to copy that. It might be in your work folder, it might be in your source folder too, if you would have put it in there. So you want to just right-click and copy that, and then go back to your other folder that we have open, and just paste it right in there, okay? So what did we do? We deleted the 2016 folder over here. We went to our copy of the 2016 folder and just replaced it, right? So we just, that's our preferences. Yes, sir.
Mine is frozen as well.
Yeah, mine's still.
Oh, wait.
Still. One of the other classes that's here, they're an advanced rendering class, so sometimes they'll use different plugins that we're using. One of the plugins is called V-Ray, and what it does is it's just a different kind of rendering engine. Okay, so here's an example of V-Ray. So from inside Maya, there's a thing that says V-Ray, and then when you click this thing, what happens is it goes out to the server and it's looking for the license for V-Ray because V-Ray is activated. It's trying to see if there's a license for it. And it doesn't just try it like super quick. It sometimes takes some time to figure it out. So right now, it's not finding the license. So it looks like it's locked up, but what's happening is it's actually just going out there. As we load our own preferences, that goes away. Okay, because our preferences don't say to load V-Ray. Their preferences did. So that's why on some of these, it's taking forever to load the preference or to load Maya because it's trying to find this license out there. All right. So just to kind of recap what we did last time, we don't need to follow along with it. I'm just going to show it just so you can see it again. What we did last time is we went through this little sprocket thing, and we created a brand new shelf, and we renamed it. It'll pop up with a name, and then we added some icons to the shelf. Okay, does anyone remember the hotkey to add icons to the shelf? Control Shift. It's close. So we go to Control Shift, and then whatever it is we want to add to the shelf, we can Control Shift and then click on it, and that item gets added to the shelf. Okay, so as you start working, just remember that, because you may want to add something to the shelf. Think of all the programs you use. Sometimes there's like 5 or 6 things that you need like easy access to throughout. Okay, and that's one of the cool things about Maya. We went over a part of the interface. So we discussed the menu set up here. We discussed how we can change the menu set by going through this menu and making it a different menu set. We can customize it. We showed how we can kind of pull these menus off and set them aside. These are our selection tools, the move tool, the rotate tool, and the scale tool. We went through and looked at the hotkeys for these things. And remember, they were at the top left of the keyboard. They were Q for select, W for move, E for rotate, and R for scale. Okay. We also went through how to navigate inside of Maya. Alt, left mouse button to do this, Alt, middle mouse button to do this, and Alt, right mouse button to do that. We also created a couple objects just to play around with. And we went over here to the channel box and we played with some of the translates, rotates, and scales. We came down here to this input and we were able to adjust some of the parameters of this using the virtual slider. Okay, and each one of the objects has their own settings for what happens in the virtual channel box. So something like helix has different parameters. I can add more coils or take coils away. I can change the height of all the coils. I can change the width. I can change the radius. I can change how many subdivisions are going around the coils. Okay. As you become more comfortable with Maya and using some of the stuff, you'll pick up on certain things. Okay. And you should really be looking at these as kind of like starting points for creating objects. So if you're doing like a ray gun, you may want to have this kind of like spring inside the ray gun for whatever reason. And you wouldn't want to start off with like a cube for that, because this looks nothing like a spring. You'd want to start off with something that looks like a spring and that you can put wherever you need to. So we can rotate it and scale it and put it somewhere, and now we have this spring ready to go inside of our ray gun. Okay? If we're doing an animation for a soccer game, we could start off obviously with a sphere, and that could be sufficient. But there's also this soccer ball, which would obviously be more sufficient because it's a soccer ball and we're doing a soccer game. Okay, if we're building the pyramids, we might want to go in here and see if there's one that looks like a pyramid. There's a pyramid. And again, I'm just using those as obvious examples. These things can be anything, okay? You really have to go back to like when you did figure class, and it wasn't just about drawing the shape of an arm, but it was more about drawing a cylinder or drawing a cone or drawing a sphere, and putting those shapes together to create the final look of it is where we get this kind of stuff. So just to show you some of that example, you can watch real quick. So I'm going to make like a UFO type thing just because it's easy. I'm going to take this and take some of my divisions down. Not that way, this way. Something like that. There we go. Nope. There we go. Okay, we haven't gotten into this yet, but I'm just pulling out some of these divisions. Okay, that's what we're going to cover today, is how we can do this kind of thing. So there's a little UFO. Ooh, kind of cool. And then we can add stuff to it like legs. So I can go to the cones. The sucky thing about using Maya on a laptop is that the handprint area, I keep hitting with my hand. So it keeps selecting different things. They are. But then I need it every 2 seconds when I'm not using Maya. So I just keep it. Come on, duplicate. 180. There we go. So now I have these little legs that I can have on this thing, and maybe I want to extend them a little bit. There we go. Alright, maybe I want to take this part off here. And maybe I want to put something, maybe like a pipe up there. Okay, and then maybe I want to grab torus. Put that on top of this. And then I'll grab another sphere. Okay, so the process of this is that you know kind of like what to start off with, and then you can just go from there and start to build some of the stuff. Now, this is not the exact way you would model this kind of thing, but just to kind of get an idea across that we can use these shapes in different ways to create different parts of different objects. Eventually, you'll get into kind of streamlining your whole process, okay? It's kind of like when you're first drawing something, and you may start off with like, okay, I know they have some sort of perspective to it, so you draw the horizon, you put your point lines in, you draw your other line, your vanishing lines, you draw all this stuff, and then eventually you get to the shape, right? As you become more proficient, that just becomes second nature, and you don't have to draw all that stuff. It just becomes obvious that this is what you want, so you just start drawing exactly what you want that to happen. So eventually you get to the point of using something like a cube, where we can start to shape a cube into different things. So like for this cube here, I can grab certain points and just start pulling them and just start tweaking what this is going to look like. And then from this, I can insert my own edges and start to shape out what this is going to look like. Okay, and then going from here, there's a lot of modeling process that starts exactly like this, starting off with a cube and then just adding divisions and moving, adding divisions and moving, adding divisions and moving. If we went back to that video, we watched that Making of Bruce Lee, where he started off with that sphere and he just started pushing and pulling and doing whatever. That's called sculpt modeling. Another way of doing it is like this, which is you're literally just moving, pushing, and pulling points, which is very cool. When I did the Angry Bird, where'd that guy go? When I did this, this guy here started off as a cube, and then I added where the eyes were going to go, I added where the nose was going to go, I added where the horns were going to go, and then I smoothed it all out and then added a lot more detail to this. So here he is, he finally got done printing like 14 hours after I started printing it. And it's pretty solid. It looks like there's still some stuff, some plastic left. I'm not sure how much exactly, but it's a pretty quick thing. It took me only about 2 hours to build this guy, and that was just playing around with it and not using a stylus, a tablet. Tablets obviously make it go quicker, but it's pretty cool to think that, you know, something that is in my brain that I put into the computer that I sent over to this machine is now in the real world. Okay, it's not like I got wood and carved it into this and built it. It's literally just like melted plastic that eventually formed into that. Thinking about where this could go, think about like in the future, if you needed something, instead of having to go to the store and buy it, you could literally download that model, send it to your printer, and you would have it. The printers are getting a little bit cheaper, they're getting a little bit smarter, and they're getting a little bit more abilities of what they can do. There are some that can use metal and some that can do like copper. If you can do copper, then you can start to build electronics. So now you're looking at, instead of going to the store and buying an iPad or an iPod or whatever, you can start to build one here. MIT they just started doing glass, which is pretty neat, where they have a glass 3D printer. It's just cool to watch, it's melted glass going around in circles and creating the stuff. So just keep an eye on that whole market, because this printer here was only $500. So this is definitely something that, you know, for the price of a class, you can get a 3D printer. All right. So this is where we're going to continue going with this kind of thing. We have to start with baby steps just to understand how to move things around and how to shape them and do all this other stuff. All right. So that's basically a summary of what we did last class. So today what I want you to do is I want you to just get used to, or get kind of reacclimated to just making some shapes. So what I want you to do is I want you to build some shapes and just start to stretch them out and just start to position them. So I've duplicated using Control D, and I've moved stuff around. And remember that when we use the move tool, we want to grab the arrows. So you see how everything's nice and flat on the ground? If I duplicate and I just grab this middle thing, okay, put it right there, you can see that that guy is not, because I didn't position him correctly. Duplicate this, scoot it over here. You can see it just doesn't line up right. So I want to delete these because they're in the wrong spot. The arrow keys only, bless you. So I'm duplicating with Control and D, and then just moving it over with the arrows. Okay, so for a few minutes, practice navigating your thing, your environment, make an object, scale it or whatever, duplicate it, and just move it into different positions. All right, the next step I want to show, or the next feature I want to show, some of you already found it kind of on accident. Okay, right now we're dealing with perspective view. Perspective view allows us to see from kind of like a 3/4 view. We can spin around, we can look at it from the top, look at it from the bottom, look at it from multiple angles, and interact with it. You know, we can do all of this kind of stuff to see what it's going to look like. Okay, now what's happening with this is there's actually a camera. There's like a 3D camera that we're moving around to figure out where this stuff is at. So that's why we're able to do that. If you tap the space bar, you'll get what's called the isometric views. The top view is right here. It says top. Here's the front, and then here's the side. So now what we're seeing is there's a camera from above pointed directly down on it. There's a camera from the front showing us the front, a camera from the side showing us the side of it. If we go to blueprints and we look at some images of blueprints, you'll see that a lot of times car blueprints. There you go. A lot of times these are like your typical views that you would get. You would get the front view, the top view, the front view, or the back view, depending on what kind of object you're modeling. Okay? If you've ever dealt with something like AutoCAD or Unigraphics or CATIA, typically they deal with these kinds of things. Okay? And then the perspective part of it is all just calculated based on these other views. All right? So sometimes you have to think like, what is it going to look like from the top or the side or the front to get everything to kind of line up. For this thing, let's say I wanted to line these things up evenly. It may be difficult for me to get it lined up because depending on my angle, the pieces are going to look maybe further apart or closer together. But if I'm in the top view, oh, what happened there? Maya's going to think for a minute while we wait. There we go. Close that, close that, close that. There we go. That was weird. So while Maya was thinking, now we're in the top view, so now we can see exactly how things are lined up. And from the top view, it looks like a mess. You can see how these are definitely not lined up. So I could go in here and grab them and make them maybe not perfect right now, but just kind of better lined up. Okay. There we go. So now these are better lined up. Now if I tap the space bar again, it goes out of that view. I can go into a different view and tap the space bar again and get into one of those other views. Okay. So anytime we're doing that, we can easily pop in and out of any of the other views. So for a second or two or three, pop in and out of views and then eventually get back to your perspective view. Now this is, again, just a temporary way to kind of get in and out of this. Now I want you to hold, I typically never do that. It's very rare that I would actually jump in and out of views like that, just because it's not my workflow, okay? Now what I want you to do is keep your mouse kind of in the center of your screen and hold the space bar down, okay? So remember this, anyone remember what it's called? Hotbox, okay? It's like a sauna. So the hotbox has menus inside here that we cannot see. One of them is right where it says Maya. There's a menu right there. So if you hold the left mouse button down on the word Maya, you'll see that this other thing pops up that says perspective, left view, top view, back view, front view, bottom view, right view, and new camera. So this allows us to quickly jump to the top view, to quickly jump to the right view, to quickly jump to the front view or the perspective view. Typically that's what I do. I don't need to have 4 different views up. I'll hold the space bar down, I'll hold my left mouse button down on the word Maya, and I'll jump to the view that I need to get to. Okay? So usually what happens is this. What happened is that people will just not pay attention to what they're doing, and they're just clicking and jumping in different views, and they don't know how to get back to where they were. Okay? If you ever get lost, they have this button right here, these two buttons right here. These are your different layouts. This one is just taking you back to perspective. That's all that one is. This one is taking you back to the 4 view, and it just resets those views. Okay? So if you get lost, you can jump to these two buttons here, and it'll help you get back to where you need to get back to. Okay? So we know now how to move stuff. What's the hotkey for duplicating? Control D. What's the hotkey for moving? What's the hotkey for scale? R. Okay. So that's what we're going to be doing next is I want you to model, nothing crazy, this little Lego. Okay. So that's all I want you to do is I want you to make the basic shapes of this. So what shape is the bottom piece of this? A rectangular cube, right? We start off with a cube. Okay. What about these Lego pieces? Cylinders. Okay. So that's all I want you to do. Model a cube, model a cylinder, and then duplicate those cylinders around to create the Lego piece. So now you're going to watch how I would build a Lego in different stages. So most of you started off with a cube. Everyone started off with a cube. And we just kind of sized it up. And then we created a cylinder. Now I'm going to jump to my top view because what I want to do is I want to see the size of this in relation to the other one. If I make this too big at the beginning and I start duplicating this, what's going to happen is my Lego is going to become crowded and I may only be able to fit like 6 pegs on there instead of 8 pegs on there. The picture is an 8-peg Lego and you can see the spacing between it. So, you know, looking at reference definitely helps. Okay, so maybe something like that. That looks pretty good. And then I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to scoot it over to this side. Okay, so I have 2 of them. Then I'm going to duplicate it and scoot it up. And there we go. It's pretty close. Grab all these and just scoot them back. Okay. Now, some of you may have opted to duplicate and move each one individually. That to me is just counterproductive, but obviously you just don't know the workflow yet. So as we do stuff, we kind of work in a quick fashion because we always are going to have changes. Okay. So this is very quick and dirty. There's my Lego. If I needed a Lego for a single scene, there it is. But sometimes you want to add more detail to that Lego. You want to add more stuff to it besides just like blah, right? So a couple things that I could add to this. If we look at the picture, let me zoom in on here. Do you see the actual shape of these pegs? See how there's a little bit of a corner to it, a little bit of rounding? And it looks like it's actually maybe a little bit even tapered on the top, right? So let's pretend that I did this Lego and it took me 6 hours to do it, but then I realized, geez, I got to replace those pegs. The quickest way I can do that, the easiest, right? So I always want to work as quickly as I can inside of Maya. So I'm always like deleting stuff and redoing things and moving things around. So you're not at this stage yet, but I just want to show you that I can do this kind of thing. I can take this and add bevels to this. There we go. And then I can take this thing again and I can duplicate it and scoot it over and duplicate it. And there we go. Okay. Now I look at the Lego again and I say, oh, this Lego piece itself, the square piece, actually has a bit of a bevel too. No problem. I go into this and I go to one of my tools, Edit Mesh, Bevel. Zero, 1. Oh, that's a good number. Okay, so now I have a little bevel on that. And then the director or whoever it is that's hiring me to do this, they come to me and say, okay, well now we want to be able to stack them on top of each other. No big deal, because I can just take them like this and duplicate all of these and just go boom. And now they can stack on top of each other, and I can stack up 100 if I really needed to. But then he says he wants to see the bottom, and the bottom obviously can't look like this because that's not what a Lego bottom looks like. Lego bottom has a hole on the bottom. Oops, that's not it. There we go. Okay, so it has these little pipes in there, then it has the bar in there, then it has the other stuff inside there. So for this one, I'm going to go into this and I'm going to extrude that and pull it in a touch. Really? Yeah. That's got to be it.
Not just the
Okay. So there's the opening, and then I can go and grab a pipe, and then I can change my radius of the pipe, I can change my thickness of the pipe, I can scale the pipe down. Where's our 1, 2, 3, right? That's pretty close. And then we got a little cube bar that goes across this. Yep. And then we have these little dimples in here too. And again, I could keep modeling, keep modeling, keep modeling this. The word Lego, I could model the word Lego and put that on there. The serial number, I could figure out where that is and put that inside there. Okay, it all depends how realistic these things need to be. When you look at this kind of thing, in this specific scene, he's Lego obviously, but he's not like made up of a million little Legos. When they do things like the like this kind of thing, this is made up of like millions of Legos to make all of this kind of thing happen. And the companies will actually spend months just researching how do they do this, because it's never been done before. No one's ever had an animation like this happen. So they will research like what is different ways that we can have this whole thing take shape. This is, again, throughout your entire history of learning stuff. Let me delete all these. You will find tips and tricks. That's your whole thing, is just tips and tricks. The more tips and tricks you know, faster you can go with this stuff. So I'll show it easier. Let me do this. Okay, so I'm going to take this and group it, which is just Control-G. It's on your hotkey sheet. So I want to make a little stairway Lego. Okay, so come on. So I'm going to duplicate it with Control-D, right? And then I move it where I want it to go, right about there. And then instead of holding Control and hitting D, the other one that's on there, it's not on there, but you can write it down. Shift-D, okay? So I hold Shift and tap D, and then look what that does. It does basically like a step and repeat from Illustrator or InDesign. I think InDesign has it. So now instead of me having to place all of these things, I only have to place basically the first one. Spend the time doing that first one, and that's just Shift-D. Okay? And it does it for all the stuff. So if I decided, let me take this thing here, and I'm going to go Control-D. I'm going to pull it up a bit. I'm going to pull it over here. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. And my Lego is obviously off. But then I can just hit Shift-D again, and you can see how it's going to just duplicate whatever I've just done. I moved it up, moved it off, rotated it, and it does it for the exact same way for the next one, and the next one, and the next one. So you can create some really, really cool stuff just by doing that. Okay? So how I did these little pegs is I did exactly that. I just take these two, I duplicate them and scoot them over, hold down Shift, hit D, hit D. Okay? I usually like to equate Maya, like how I work. I have my mouse, I have my keyboard. It's kind of like learning an instrument, okay? There's no like easy way for me to show you exactly how to get everything to work as fluidly as I'm showing it. Usually what happens, and this happened even just during this, is that we may think we have to hold buttons down. So we hold W down and we're trying to move stuff and it's not working. Or we hold the right mouse button down, which gives us different options, okay? So we just have to be aware of that. Sometimes in Maya, we're holding things down. Sometimes we're not holding things down, depending on what we're trying to do. All right, so we just have to be aware of those kinds of things. Okay, so as we go throughout, we'll continue playing with this kind of thing. I'll show you this. If I just take these, and I'm just going to duplicate this up here. Okay, and see how I just duplicated just the box. That's all I've duplicated in that case. And then I'm going to duplicate this. Yeah, we'll get in the wireframe. Oops. And put that right there and delete this thing. There we go. Okay, so now this little stack of Legos, it looks like it's a stack of Legos, right? It looks like everything is complete. If I go to the bottom, there's all the stuff. I go to the top, there's that. But in the middle, it's nothing. It's just basically a cube. Okay? So that's how in a lot of movies they're able to get away with having such high-res stuff, because our mind is thinking that all that detail is there. You ever watch Brain Games? I think it is on Science Channel, where they show you like behind the scenes of what your brain's thinking when you look at certain things. It's an awesome show. It's kind of like that. You know, your brain just kind of fills in the holes as to what's not there, and we just assume that these things are there. All right. So that's just the basics of our stuff. All right. So you have your Lego thing. So now let's go into some of the other modes that we have. Okay. So we've done this navigation part. We've done the orbit, track, dolly, last view, next view, frame selected, and all. The next one is viewport. Okay. So one thing to note, and I think I mentioned this last time, is that if we're over here in the channel box and we start typing stuff in, okay, and then I try to go to a hotkey, like I'm trying to hit undo now, and I'm hitting Control Z like 75 times, and it's not doing anything. My Maya focus is right here. It's right inside the channel box. Hotkeys aren't going to work. I have to bring the focus back into this area in order to do the hotkey. So when the hotkeys aren't working, I just click right inside here. So you see this little gray area above my numbers and stuff. Then I hit Control Z and it'll undo it. Okay? So at any point you're hitting a hotkey and it's not working, make sure that your focus is on that main screen, because that's where all the action happens. So the first hotkey is wireframe, which is 4. So if you hit 4, you can see the wireframe. So what does the wireframe mean to us? We can see through the object, okay? In some cases, that's going to be crucial because certain things need to line up with certain things. When you're doing a character and you're doing their mouth, you need to see what the inside of the mouth looks like. So you have to have it wireframe so you can get inside the mouth. You need to be able to see what the eye socket looks like. When you're doing a car, there's so much stuff that needs to line up, okay? So we need to see the wireframe. When I did my Legos here, let me jump to my right view. I used the transparency. I didn't use it exactly the way I wanted to. But if you look here, you can see that this little peg goes right to the top. See this line? And it's hard for you to visualize what's happening. This line right here is the top of my Lego. Okay? The very top surface of that. If I jump out and I look at the very, the very top of this, you can see that it's actually like sticking out of the Lego. Okay? So that's why in the side view, if I go to wireframe, I can see, oh, it's hitting it. So I'm just going to nudge it down so that it's just under that line. So now it looks like it's like embedded in the surface. So wireframe is an important thing to utilize. Okay, so 4 is wireframe. It just gets us into wireframe. What's the next one? Shaded, and it is 5. Okay, so 5 is just what we were at before. So now our view is shaded. So now we can see what it looks like when it's shaded. Okay, what's the next one? And 6. Okay, we're not going to see anything with textured. We're not at the texturing point yet. I'm going to show you up here what it looks like, but don't do this. So I'm going to take this stuff and I'm going to assign a material to it. There we go. And by default, I can give this just a color, so it's red. All right. Or I can add a texture to it. And a texture is something else besides just a flat color, if you want to think of it like that. So one of them is stucco. There we go. Okay, so now my Lego is this really psychedelic color stucco thing. If I go to 4, I don't see any color information, right? If I go to 5, I don't see any color information. But if I go to 6, now I'm seeing that color information, okay? The reason we would not want to see that is when you get into more of the realistic stuff, your textures themselves could be a gigabyte's worth of textures or 2 gigabytes worth of textures. That's a lot for the computer to try to manage while you're working, okay? So typically you would work with that off unless you need to see the textures and what they're doing, okay? So that's what 6 would do. All right, so what's the next one? 7 and lighting, okay? So now I hit 7 and what happens to it? It turns black. Why does it turn black? No lights. Exactly, okay? So under create lights, I'm going to add a point light, okay? And you can add a point light also. There we go. And then we can move it around. And you can see how the light is going to affect our object. Okay, now it's very similar to a realistic light. In this case, it's a point light. A point light is, think of it like a light bulb, okay? So we just have this spot, this dot, and the light just emits outward, okay? It's also called an omnidirectional, which means it's going to go in all directions. So a point light is like an omnidirectional light. If I move it to that side of the object and I spin around, you can see that there's no light on this side. Okay, the light is over here. The light's on this side, shining on the object, but this side's going to stay dark because there's no light obviously getting to it. So just like the real world, if this is something that we're going to be lighting, we have to think of it like the real world. So we would have to say, okay, if this is a light bulb lighting up this side, I may have to duplicate it. Okay. And also light up that side. Okay, so now I have 2 lights in the scene that are kind of balancing each other out. All of the objects that we play with are going to have their own attributes. Okay, so far we've dealt with just polygons, okay, which is just geometry. A light has its own stuff. If I go to the channel box, you can see that it has a color, it has an intensity, it has shadow settings, it has some other stuff inside here. These are, again, the highlighted ones. These are typically the ones you would play with. If you go up to your shelf and hit this one that says Attribute Editor, or you hit Control A, that will open up the Attribute Editor for your object you have selected. So hit Control A and look at the Attribute Editor. Okay, now this is whatever you have selected, it'll show you the attributes for that item. So in the channel box, who knows what color this is? It's white. But who would know without knowing 111 is white, right? You just wouldn't pick up that that's white. So that's why they have this little color thing. So as you click on that color thing right there, you can actually pick the exact color you want. And that corresponds to these numbers here, which are 0.071, 0.2, whatever. Okay? So we can color the lights too. Just like in the real world, we can color lights. There's an intensity. So we can pull the intensity up, we can pull the intensity down. Okay? If we're doing a key light, that would obviously be our strongest light. Our fill light would be a bit dimmer, and then we have a rim light too that would also help kind of balance this whole scene out. So that's where we can kind of play with that. There's also different effects that we can add. We can add light fog, we can add light glows, we can add shadows. We can play with a whole bunch of stuff that's inside here, okay? The more in-depth, the more realistic you want your stuff to be, typically the more things we have to turn on, the slower the system's gonna go. All right, so for now, just know that we have lights and we have a lot of options that we can play with, okay? All right, the next one is rough model, okay? And it says 1. So for this one, I want you to marquee, I'm gonna delete my lights. I don't need these lights. I'm going to hit 5 to get back to that. I want you to grab all your objects and hit 1. And then what happened? Nothing. So what we're looking at is the roughest version of our model. This is exactly, in Polygon world, this is exactly what the model looks like. Hit 2. Okay, everyone's going to get something different. And 2, what we see is we see a cage, and then we see this other thing like inside the cage. Hit 3. Okay, so now we're seeing the thing inside the cage. What this allows you to do, and I'm going to make a cube just so you can see this a little bit more apparent. Okay, oops, 5, 3. So what this is 1 is my model. This is what my model looks like. When I hit 3, this is what my smoothed out model looks like. Okay, so if I took my cube and I smoothed it, I get a sphere. All right, if I hit 2, I get both. Now, what is the purpose for this? When we, remember last class, I think it was last class, we talked about the different resolutions of your model that you would go with. So when we did the bowling pin, I showed we can make the bowling pin with like 8 divisions. But if we wanted it to be like a higher resolution, a smoother bowling pin, we could add more divisions to it. That's what this is showing us, okay? So what this allows me to do, and I'm going to go into a different mode again, is I can grab different pieces of this and extrude. And you can see how I can model this and shape this and tweak this. And I'm editing a very, very simplified version. I'm only editing that initial cube, but it's giving me the smoothed out version of this. Okay? This, that, this. All right, so I'm very quickly able to create this kind of shape. Now, if I started with something like a sphere and I tried to shape that out, it would never turn out as smooth as it is here. Okay? Let me create a sphere. And you see all the divisions that are on the sphere? If I were to grab these divisions and try to pull them down and try to kind of shape this into that, it would be very difficult to get a nice smooth shape. Okay? So what we typically do is we try to work with something that is really, really rough and then smooth it out. Okay? So if we look at that's a good example there. So if we look at this face here may have like 10,000 divisions all over the face to make it nice and smooth. But the actual work that they're doing is on this rough model. There's only one point here, but that one point, if they pulled it out, would affect 100 points to keep it all nice and smooth. Okay? So it's basically we're editing something really, really rough, and the end product is something really smooth and detailed. All right? So as we start to work on stuff, we'll be working in this method of bouncing between basically 1 and 3. It's rare that I would actually use 2. Typically, I just work in 1 and 3. Okay? So that's what that's going to do, is it's giving us a preview of what that smoothing out process would look like. Okay? So that's 1, 2, and 3. Notice again how they're all kind of clustered together. what the things look like in our view, 4, 5, 6, and 7, right? Right next to each other. 1, 2, and 3, what the object's smoothness view is like, are all clustered together. So again, they've made it nice and easy. The next one is standard and full screen. In Photoshop, you hit the F key and it makes everything big, right? It basically hides your palettes and brings everything to the forefront. You hit it again, it makes it even bigger. Maya does that with Control Spacebar, okay? Now again, this is one that might be kind of confusing because if you're not used to it, basically everything that you've known is gone. Okay, so Control Spacebar tabs us in, tabs us out, really quick. As you get better at modeling, typically you work like this because it gives you a bigger screen so you can have more stuff happening inside your screen. And like I said, with the second monitor, it's always nice to put your palettes on one side and keep this screen as open as you can. What else? Alt-B, this is a fun one. Hold down Alt and you just tap B and you can change what your background color looks like. Okay? And this is good because some objects are easier to see on certain backgrounds. Okay? Some of you may have had a hard time, oops, wrong button, seeing your objects when they were like this. Look at that in the background. They pretty much like blend in together. I can't even see it. So if I hit Alt-B, now we have this gradient back there, and I can see my objects obviously a bit clearer. Tapping the spacebar we already went over. That's just that. Hit play. These menus up here, okay, modeling, rigging, animation, FX. Instead of me going up here to get to them, I can just use F2, 3, 4, and 5. And obviously those are different now. These ones actually won't be on the test just because I don't use them, but just so you can see that those do change the things. It's actually like I don't really use them. There's no reason to really use those. You might as well just hold the spacebar down and get to everything here. This is your preferred method of getting to stuff in the getting to menus. Is just to hold the spacebar down and all the menus are right there. Okay. So if you want, you can cross off all these F2 through F6 ones because you're not going to need those for the test. What was that? Yeah, under menu.
Can I ask you a very quick question?
All right, so we went over the hold spacebar. Like I said, that's the preferred method. All your menus are right there. That's the way to get to it. Now, if you want to be lazy with it, you can obviously use this to go up there. You could also use H. Oops. Okay, apparently they got rid of that one. I never used it, but it was a nice one that they had at one point. You can hold H and then switch to different menus. We went over the QWERTY. A couple that we didn't show is the show manipulator and the last tool used. Just so you can see what these guys are, if I created a different kind of light, so I'm going to create a spotlight. Okay, so here's a spotlight, and a spotlight functions just like a real-world spotlight functions, in that I have a light here, and right now it's basically just aimed straight ahead. So if I wanted to aim over there, I would just grab the light and I would just rotate it. Right? That makes sense? So I could grab this and rotate it over there. Now in our view, it's very tricky to actually see like what is it pointing to, right? I have no idea what it's actually pointing at. So the show manipulator, which is T, gives me two arrow sets, okay? One is my origin, one is what it's pointing at. So very quickly, I can just say you are going to point at this Lego. Okay, so you see how I point it right at the Lego, and now it's pointed right at the Lego. I want to point it at this thing, I point it at that thing. Okay, so that's what the show manipulator is going to do. Is it's basically just an extra layer of editing our stuff. So we can do it for lights, we can do it for some of our other tools eventually we'll get to. So that's what the show manipulator does. And then the other one, which is the last tool used, let me go to my tools here. And again, this is one you're just seeing. Okay, so this is the insert edge loop tool. So it allows me to insert edge loops right here. So I've inserted some loops just so you can see what it's doing. I hit 3, and now this is a much tighter edge than down here. Okay, as I insert more, it kind of tightens that up. When I'm done with that, I get out of the tool. Okay, Now I do something else. I want to go back to that last tool that I just used. I hit Y, and it takes me back to that last tool. Okay? So there's several things inside of Maya that are tools that we can use Y to get back to that. Typically when you're modeling, there are several tools that you constantly use. So you're constantly kind of going back and forth to get those. While we're on the subject of them, typically we have two things. We have tools and we have actions. Okay? A tool is something that sounds just like it. I grab a hammer and I hit something with it. I grab my insert edge loop tool and I put an edge around wherever I click. Okay? Those are all tools. An action is more like this, where if I grab a face and I go to here and I say extrude, this is extruded. Okay? So the extrude is an action. I extrude again, pull it out. Extrude again, pull it out. So that's an action. Okay? So that's not a tool. So there's tools. They put us in a mode where we can click and do stuff. And there's actions where we click on it and tell it to do this action. We'll get to the action in a second when we get to it. There is no edge loop quick key. That was just a quick way that I got to it. The increase decrease manipulator. So plus minus. Okay? So sometimes some of the people will not pay attention to what they're doing and their book is on their keyboard and they can't get to their tools anymore because they're just enormous. So then you just hit minus until it comes into that size where you can actually see what's going on. The move tools aren't so bad, but the scale ones you can't do anything. They're just too big to even grab to do anything with. So we just shrink those down. Complete tool is just enter or return. We'll get into those as we go. And then moving the pivot. So let's say that this is a bowling pin. Obviously it's not. But right now if I were to rotate this, you can see how it's rotating from the top of it. Okay? If this is a bowling pin, put it on the ground. If this is a bowling pin and I want to rotate this so that it looks like it's falling down, it can't pivot from the top. That's not how gravity works. So I'm going to go into hold the D, that's what the hotkey says. I hold the D key and I get this weird manipulator. So I'm just going to move the arrow down here, let go of D, and now as I rotate it, you can see how now it's pivoting from the bottom. Okay? This will become more important as we start doing things. Again, like little tips and tricks that we can do. I can actually move my pivot over here. Oops. Come on. There and here. And as I duplicate this, I can duplicate it kind of like in a round because of where the pivot is. Like that. So it's kind of fun. And we can actually grab all of these now, and I can go to center pivot, and then push these down, and now I can rotate them all together like this. Sir.
So when you were saying put on the ground, should we treat the wireframe as the ground or below it?
The grid.
The shapes come in like
right. The grid I treat as the ground. Okay, that's just in my own mind makes it easier for me to work.
I mean, it seems like it. So like, in that case, though, no matter what, like we can kind of make it, even if we do start building it when it's like half, we can make the ground wherever we want.
Well, typically what I'll do is I'll just take the object and just set it right on the grid. Okay. Now that does, this is when we get into like the animation stuff, this will really bother me. But right now, let me just pull this off to the side. Right now it's below the grid, so I'll pull it above the grid, which means I'm going to set this to 0.5. Oops. So this is right on the grid. It's perfectly flush, but then I don't like having that 0.5 there. Okay? So there's something else that I typically do, which is called freezing the transforms. And that just resets these back to 0, but still keeps him on the ground. That's just the OCD in me, making sure that he's on the ground. Modify. Freeze transform. Okay? And what it does, it just zeroes out all this stuff. Okay? So it is kind of handy, but it can also mess us up too. Right now everything's kind of moving together nicely here. If I were to freeze transform this, then it's going to move differently. You can see how it's now rotating all together in the same direction, whereas before they were rotating kind of like in their own world, but kind of following that pattern. So it's a little bit different. What else? Control A attribute editor. We just went over that. Setting keys we'll get to. This is one that I think is funny. Undo and redo. So in every other program, undo is Control Z. In Maya, they've cut out the control and it's just Z. Okay? Control Z still works, but Z is all you need. So you can just hit one finger and then undo a bunch of times. And how many undos can we undo? Whatever we set it to, right. So I set mine to 50. So you see I've actually hit my limit. I can't undo anymore. So that's as far back as I can go. But every time we click on something, that's an undo. Okay? So just be aware of that every time you clicked on a new object or deselected, all of that's an undo. And that when you get into components, and we're grabbing different components, each one of these is an undo. Okay? You have to become very fluid at how you work with this stuff because selection is going to be a huge thing that we'll work with. Okay? So undo, Z, and then redo is Shift Z. Control Y does also work for redo, but it's too far away for me, and I have to hit Control. So Shift Z is right there, so I use that. Now, one thing to pay attention to also, all of these hotkeys are all lowercase, okay? Except the ones that have a shift in front of it. So lowercase z is essentially undo, uppercase Z is redo. Okay, so Maya actually differentiates between uppercase and lowercase. So if you had your caps lock on, what would that do to your undo key? Redo, right? And so as you're trying to undo something, you're like, that's not going the right direction. That's redoing stuff. Hit caps lock off, and then your undos will all work. I broke it now. There you go. Okay, so that's for all the hotkeys. If caps lock is on, stuff isn't going to function. That's why they have this there, caps lock on, so that you can see. Got it. Caps lock's on. Repeat action. Okay, G. That's what I was talking about before. The tool, go back to the last tool, is Y. Repeat the last action is G. So when I was extruding, I was just hitting G every time, and I was just re-extruding. Okay, you'll see that as we go. Duplicating, Control D. I'm going to skip that part for a second, and we're going to go to Object Component. So the mode that you keep seeing me pop in and out of is Component mode. Okay, it's kind of like Object mode and then Direct Select mode, right? Like in Photoshop, Illustrator, whatever, when you're dealing with your pen tool, your paths, you can grab the entire path, that's the object, or you can grab the individual points, that's the components. That's what we're dealing with. So on here, I can grab the individual object and move the object wherever I want, or I can grab the individual components. Because this is more than just a path, which just has points to it, it has more components. So if you hit F8, because that's the key that I put in there, yes. Okay. If you hit F8 on your keyboard, what you're going to see is that it changes color. What color is it? Blue and purple. Okay. Blue and purple means component mode. Hit F8 again. What color is this? Green, and if you had more than one object selected, white. Okay. So if I have multiple objects selected, green and white. Green is the last object I selected. Okay, again, Maya is very good at color coding things. You just have to be kind of like on the alert of how it's doing it. Okay, so F8 takes us into component mode. Here's all the points that we can edit. So we can grab these just like we did before. So I just marquee them, and I can move them around. Okay. Now this is, again, where our selection really needs to be done correctly, because in order for us to model something correctly, we need to be able to select the correct things to make it like that, okay? So in this case, I'm just grabbing points and just kind of moving them around. And again, I have to be very careful because I can make it look really good here. Okay, like that looks pretty good, but then when I spin around, look what I did to that. I just kind of screwed it up. So we constantly have to be on the alert, looking around the entire model, making sure everything's lined up the way we need it to be. Okay, so right now we're looking at what are called the vertices. Vertices are just points. Okay, everywhere there's a connection, there's a vertex. All right, so everywhere on a polygon you see vertex, vertex, vertex. The more divisions you have, the more vertices you're going to have. The harder it's going to be to work with that. Now, if we wanted to see other components, we go up here. Okay, this up here is your selection mask. Right now we're on this blue one, or this far left one, which is points. Points, vertex, whatever you're going to call them. The next one is a different one. We'll just ignore it. The next one, which is a line, is edges. Okay? So if I click on that one, my purple points go away, and now I can grab edges. And as I come over here, you can see how I can grab individual edges. And when I did that little demo about selecting it, I selected all the way around. If I double click an edge, it selects it all the way around. Okay, so over here I double click, and it grabs the edge all the way around. If I double click this way, nope, I thought it would go, it didn't go. There's another way to select it that way. Okay, but there's different ways that we can select these items, and then I can do scaling and moving and rotating of all these items here. Okay? It's abstract.
It makes me think of, for some reason, it makes me think of one of the ships from Star Trek. I have no idea why.
I don't know, because they're weird. The next one in this list is faces. Okay? Faces are where the points are outlined. Okay? So this thing right here, that's a face. That's a face. That's a face. Okay? And depending on what we're trying to do, sometimes we'll grab vertices, sometimes we'll grab edges, sometimes we'll grab faces. Those are typically the three things that we're going to be playing with when we're modeling our items. Okay? Now to get out of that, we just hit F8 again and we get back to object mode. Now you can see what mode you're in based on where it says objects up there. If I hit F8, it says components. Hit F8, objects, components. Okay, so you see how I toggle between those? If I'm in component mode, I can't select the object. Okay, I can marquee all the points of the object and move the object, but that's actually like a bad thing to do. Okay, so if you're moving objects, make sure in object mode and you just move it where you want to move it. The other way, and some of you may have found this too, is if you hold the right mouse button down, you'll get this menu that comes up that says edges, vertex, faces. Okay, or if you accidentally click this one, whoa, it explodes it. It's kind of cool. Okay, so this is a way to temporarily go into it. And this is per object, okay, meaning I do this one object at a time, where F8, that component mode, takes me into it for all of them. Okay, so all the objects are now in that mode.
I love that little window up there. This says,
Yeah, how do you get that?
This, remember these little things here?
Oh, yeah.
We can collapse and expand these little guys so that we can see all that stuff. Okay, so that's your object and component mode. A lot of time we'll be spending in object and component mode because that's where most of the magic is going to happen. Okay, hiding and showing. Control H, Control Shift H. Oops. Select the object, Control H, Control Shift H. Okay, so typically that's what you would do. Not really a big thing to hide something at this level, but that's what we would do. Painting stuff, let me just delete what I have here just so you can see some of the painting things. Eventually we're going to get into a lot of these tools and play with them because they're very cool and they're very powerful. So in this case, let me make a cube. So let's say I have this object here, and we'll go back and make this 0.5 so it's sitting on the ground, and we'll freeze the transform so it's frozen. And I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to add a bevel to this. So under my tools, I'm going to go to, under my edit mesh, I'm going to go to bevel. And this is a tool palette that pops up, okay? So a lot of tools will have this little palette, and it allows us to edit what the settings are. So I can go here, add some more divisions, whatever. Oops. I'm also going to smooth this out. Perfect. Okay. So now the next ones that I'm going to go through are these painting ones. Okay. So with the painting ones, under the mesh tools, I'm going to go here to the sculpting tools. Okay. Now this is more along the lines of how this guy was created. There's a program called ZBrush. And in ZBrush, it's all mostly just kind of that thing that's sculpting it. So that's what this is going to do. So I'm going to go into my sculpting tool. And I'm going to shrink this down because this is like crazy big. And I'm going to shrink that down. Keep going, keep going. There we go. That's big. And that's good. Okay. Whoa, too big. Strength 1. There we go. A little better. All right. So now with this one, I'm able to kind of sculpt and shape what this thing looks like. Without me having to go in there and push and pull individual points, I'm able to just kind of more like clay, sculpt it. So these tools here, brush size, hold B and left mouse button drag. So if I hold B, left mouse button drag, I'm changing the size of that brush. Okay? Hold M, left mouse button drag, I'm controlling how much I'm moving that surface up or down. Hold U and click on. All right, it doesn't want to work right now. But they have all the other tools here, so I can play with any of these other ones. So I can go to the smooth tool and smooth this out. Make my brush bigger. I can go to the sculpt tool and sculpt this some more. So you can see very quickly, this is kind of like an ice cube, right? And I can do foamy. Ooh, too much. Really pull it down. Holy cow.
So this is like what that guy was doing with that Bruce Lee.
Yeah, this is exactly what he was doing with the Bruce Lee thing. Just sculpting it over and over and over again. So now this foamy is just kind of adding to it. And there's a wax, and there's, you know, a bunch of different things that we can play with to really tweak what this is going to look like. Okay. Alt-A would show the wire, and Alt-R would toggle the reflection on there. Okay, so that's what these things are going to do, is they just are all part of that sculpting tool. Eventually we'll get to it. It'll become more relevant once we actually get to it and we start using some of these things, but it's not going to be for a little bit. Snapping is an important thing as well. So here's my item. I'm just going to duplicate it. So let's say I want to snap this item to this. The first one is holding down X. So I can hold down X and snap, and you can see how I'm snapping this to the grid, right? So I'm just holding X. This is one of those times where we're holding the hotkey, and it snaps it right to the grid, and I can snap it right on top of it. The next one is C. Okay, and C is snapping to curve. So with this one, it works a little bit different. Okay, I'm holding C, it's not snapping to anything. But if I hold down C and middle mouse button, click and drag along this edge, it'll align it right to that edge. Okay, so if I had a character and he had maybe some chains on him, or he had something on his face and I needed to align it to it, I could snap it right to one of those edges along the face. And then V is snapping to point. I can snap this to any one of the points or vertices of this box. Okay? Again, as we go, it becomes more obvious, hey, I wish I could do this specific thing, and now we'll have the tool right there at our fingertips. The next couple are a little bit more usable on a daily basis. So as we rotate stuff, you can see it's kind of arbitrary, just rotating in whatever direction. If I hold J, though, now it's snapping. Okay, so I can rotate it perfectly on -90 or perfectly at 0 or 15-degree increments. So that's pretty nice. The next one, which is doing it relative, I hold Shift-J, and what it's doing is it's keeping that angle that I initially had and then rotating it 15 degrees each time. Again, these are things that will become more relevant as we start to model our own stuff. Okay? So that's essentially all the hotkeys except for this little grouping right in here. Okay? So I'm going to cover that real quick, and then I'm going to let you guys go a little bit early today. So you probably already know the first one, which is grouping, right? Oops. My snap is stuck on, so I'm going to turn my snap off. Snap. There we go. Okay. So I have these objects here, and I want to group them. So in any other program, what do you use for grouping? Control G. Same thing in Maya. Okay. Now here's where it's different in Maya. These objects are grouped, but they're still separate. Okay. So if I were to click on the individual objects, you'll see that I don't grab the group of objects. I'm only grabbing the individual parts of that object. If I marquee it, what do you notice about the color?
One is green, the other's white.
Right, which indicates what? The last one was selected, right? The green one was the last selected. So this isn't one big group. This is individual objects. I'm going to go to my outliner. And the outliner is a tool that allows us to see our scene hierarchy. If you never heard that term before, basically how stuff is organized. Okay? So here's my group. I can click on the group. Everything is now in green. If I move it, it moves the entire group. Okay? There's a little plus sign next to it. I can open that up, and there's all the individual objects. All right? So as I'm out here and I'm marqueing, you can see how I've highlighted all three of the objects. They're in this bright blue. The group is in a dark blue. If I click the group, it turns to a bright blue, but none of these get highlighted, but I can still move it around. So it's going to be a little bit confusing at first to understand that when you group something, it's just kind of like put inside of it. If you've had After Effects before, you know how you have a null and you parent your objects to a null object? Okay, it's exactly like that. Okay, we've taken these cubes and parented them to this null called group 1. And just to kind of bring that home, if I group if I group nothing, look what it creates, a null. Okay? So that's what this is. It takes these three objects and parents them to the group. I can do whatever I want to the individual objects, and it affects just themselves. I can do whatever I want to the group, and it affects all three objects. Okay? So if I grab this object and I pull it up, and this object and pull it down, and this object and pull it over here, it doesn't affect any of the other ones. But if I grab the group and move it, it moves, obviously, all of them. Okay? So grouping is Control G. I don't have ungrouping on there, but it's Shift G or Control Shift G, edit. Or maybe it's not anything. So there's ungroup also, but you don't typically need to do that. The other ones that are on there, parent and unparent, do that. They put something into a parent relationship, or they pull it out of one. So in this case, remember I said that it's like these three objects are parented to that group. So if I were to hit Shift P, you can see how it pulls them out of the group. I click on group, nothing is there. I click on the individual cubes, I can still move them. But now this parent structure is no longer there. If I grab the items, grab the group, hit P for parent, now it's part of the group again. Okay? So parenting, grouping, they're kind of related. Basically, if we wanted this object to move with this object, we would group them or parent them or do something to create that relationship together. So it's just a quick example of what I mean by that. Here's a cube. Come on. Reset. Okay, there's a quick little arrowhead. Here's a cylinder. I'm going to use my discrete rotate to snap it in. Oops. All right, so pretend that this is an awesome arrow, okay? So we need all these parts to move together, right? Because obviously if this is going to be shot, all the pieces move together. So I can grab all these objects and group them together, and now all these objects will move as one piece, okay? So wonderful, I have these objects all grouped together. Now I may have several arrows, right? I may have 30 arrows inside here. So if I take this and I duplicate it and pull it here, pull it there, pull it here, and pull it there, here. Okay. So now I have all these arrows that are inside of this. And then I also have this bag, cylinder. I'm just going to extrude that, scale it down. And again, this is just crude, just for demonstration purposes. Don't hold it against me. All right. So there we go. So there's our bag. I'm going to hide this grid because it's driving me crazy. All right. So now I have a quiver, right? And I have my arrows. That's a quiver, right? The bag. Yeah. Okay. The quiver, I have my arrows. And now if I look at my outliner, you can see here's all of my arrows. I could obviously rename them. I should. And here's my quiver. I'm going to take my arrows and grab the quiver and parent them in there. Okay? So now if I grab my quiver, all the arrows are going to go with it. But then if I open it up, I can still grab the individual arrow and pull it out and get it ready to be shot. Okay? So you can think of it like in that instance. Okay? So there's times where we want this all to happen so that it's all nicely laid out. Grouping, parenting, they're very interchangeable, but what we're doing to them is going to be a little bit different. Sometimes we're really just using them for modeling purposes. Sometimes we're using them for other purposes. Okay? All right, so that is, in a nutshell, that's it. Oh, the last three here, Control N, Control O, and Control S. New scene, open scene, and save scene. They're just handy to have.
They all gonna be on the test.
Okay. All of these will be on the test with the exception of these menu ones, the F2 through F6. And I think I'm also going to take the under the painting one because I think they changed it. These bottom three here, I think they changed, so we'll just scrap those two. Okay, so choose tool, show wire, and toggle reflect will be off. Everything else will be on it. Okay, now, and the menus will be off too, yeah. Not the whole menus, the spacebar one will be on there, but the rest of them. September 14th is when we're doing the test. Keep in mind that next class you come in, we're going to be working a little bit more on your own. So you want to bring your sheets, and you want to start just kind of like going through these and making sure you're reinforcing those. Okay, it's not just a test, it's actually stuff you want to use. So make sure you bring your sheets.